and welcome to Eerie Earth. I'm your host Kieran, and I will be guiding you on your journey through the paranormal. Together we will learn about hauntings, dark tales and much more. So sit back, relax and join me as we explore this eerie earth. Edinburgh, Scotland's capital city, is home to the Scottish Parliament, the Fringe Festival, and is even the birthplace of Harry Potter. This bustling metropolis has around 4 million tourists visit its cobbled streets every year. But many do not know about the dark, malevolent past that plagues one of the most haunted cities in the world. Tales of poltergeists, vicious spectral attacks, grave robbing, murder, and even vampirism tarnish this stunning city's gentle appearance. Below the streets of the historic city sits a warren of tunnels that spans the infamous Old Town. Ancient streets lost in time, forgotten in darkness, waiting to welcome visitors once more. Tales of dark, ominous shadow figures skulking the corridor and devil worship plague the vaults. Sitting beneath the Royal Mile, the backbone of the Old Town, is a close that was covered up and forgotten. Mary King's Close, named after the famed market trader and a member of Edinburgh Council who in the 17th century worked hard to get equal rights for women on the council run by men, was a very dark and desolate place. Sunlight would very rarely pierce the darkness due to the buildings being too high. Edinburgh was the first city in the world to have tenement housing, or as we know them today, skyscrapers. Some buildings reaching 14 stories tall. The buildings were very cheaply made, being constructed from wood, which meant they bent at the top, allowing the residents on the top floor to be able to shake hands with their neighbours across the street. The council built these houses as a way to deal with overcrowding within the city. People were too scared to build their houses outside of the city walls, so the council only had one option: to build up instead of out. The rich would live at the top of the building because the light would make it into their rooms, so more money meant more light, meant nicer living. It also meant that they were away from all the muck and squalor that littered the streets below. The poorer residents of the close would either live on the street, or if they had some money they could live on the bottom floors right next to the street. Up to 10 members of one family would live in one small room, which meant there was a lot of overcrowding within the building. Because it was so dark and dank, they needed a way to light their houses, and the most common way to do this was to use lamps. The rich would use oil or sweet-smelling honey, which would help block out the foul stench coming from the street. The poor, however, didn't have such luxuries and would have to use fish oil to light their lamps, so you can imagine the smell. The smell of burning fish oil, body odour and the stench from the livestock outside was worsened by how the residents would dispose of their waste. The buildings didn't have outside toilets, sanitation or pipes for running water, so they had to use a bucket. One bucket would be used for 10 members in the family and would have several uses. If you were unlucky to be the youngest member of the family, it was your job to empty all the waste. Before 1749, you could throw your waste wherever you wanted to, but a decree introduced after 1749 meant you could only do it 2 times a day, when the bells of St. Giles Cathedral struck 10 p.m. and again at 7 a.m. The residents on the ground floor could empty their waste into the street no problem, but for the rich who lived at the top, there was only one way to empty your waste: throw it out of the window. As they threw their waste out the window, they would shout, "Regardez-le!" which came from the French "regardez-le," meaning watch the water. A passerby could shout, "Hold your hand!" to tell people they were passing, but if they didn't say anything, well, the result was messy. With a combination of livestock, food and human waste, you can only imagine what the street would have been like. The cobbled close was on a slope leading down the hill. At the bottom of the hill was the Nor Loch, the place where everyone in Edinburgh got their drinking water. They bathed and they washed their clothes. So all of the waste from the street would cascade down the road and end up in the water of the Nor Loch for everyone in Edinburgh to enjoy. Due to the horrendous living conditions in Edinburgh, disease was rife, from typhoid, typhus, flux and even the plague. In 1645, Edinburgh was struck with a devastating Black Death, killing over half the population of the city. The disease was carried by the fleas that were on rats, and with the conditions down in the close, it's no surprise that the disease spread so rapidly. The disease was called Yersinia pestis bacteria, and it would cause some horrendous symptoms for those infected. These would include swollen glands, unsightly and incredibly painful bulbous pus-filled boils which would appear under the arms and in the groin area, making it impossible to walk or to move your arms. The victim would encounter severe bouts of vomiting, which in many cases would result in intestinal rupturing. While there was no cure for the disease, doctors found that there was a way to make things a little bit more comfortable for those affected, albeit not a very nice treatment. They found that if they burst the boils, it made it easier for the victim to move around. They would do this by using a rod, which they would heat over a naked flame and insert into the boil, bursting it, allowing the pus and the infection to flow out. Screams of agony would fill the air as the mask-clad doctor performed the horrendous procedure to cure those inflicted. The doctors would wear a long leather-beaked mask which would cover their face entirely, giving them a truly haunting appearance. Their eyes would be covered by the mask, only with small glass-covered circles allowing them to see out of. They would fill the curved beak with sweet-smelling herbs and spices to block out the repulsive stench on the close. Their tall stature was covered in a long leather trench coat that stretched down to heavy boot-clad feet to prevent the fleas from getting on their clothes. All the procedures would have been completed whilst wearing thick leather gloves to make it that much more difficult. In 1753, the Royal Exchange was built in the Royal Mile to house the market traders in the city all in one place. However, its destination meant that it had to knock down a lot of the tenement buildings in Mary King's Close and actually built over the close. The last residents left the close in 1902. Mary King's Close has a plethora of ghost stories that dates back to 1645. One tells of a man called Thomas Cathcart, who was a lawyer. In the height of the Black Death pandemic, people in the close were encouraged to leave their homes in an attempt to quell the spread of the disease. Thomas refused to leave his home. He slowly began to go insane as he claimed in his diaries that he was plagued with images of disembodied limbs and limbless apparitions of children in his home. He claimed he could see a large skinless dog sitting on his couch, chewing away at the muscle and the bone on his body. Tales of large, dark figures skulking the length of the close have been witnessed by visitors to the museum, as well as people in period clothing that they've mistaken for actors who work in the close. When they approach the member of staff to ask them a question about the close, the person disappears before them. Ghost hunters have reported catching strange female voices through their EVP experiments, seeing shadows and some even being pushed. The most famous ghost to haunt the close is that of Wee Annie. It's thought that Annie was a young girl who lived on the close in the 1600s. However, there is no record of a girl living on the close of that name. The closest reference is that to be of a daughter of one Jean Mackenzie who lived on Allen Close, which ran off Mary King's. In the 1990s, a well-known Japanese medium called Aiko Gibo visited the infamous close during the filming of a documentary about the most haunted places in Britain. As she came across a dilapidated wooden structure in Allen Close, she froze in fear. She claimed that she could not cross the threshold into the 17th century building due to the amount of pain that was emanating from within. She was eventually able to enter the building and made her way over to the fireplace where she said the child was standing. She said that her name was Annie and that she was missing her favourite doll and was very upset. This really touched Aiko, and she asked the runner of the show to head up to ground level to go to one of the tourist shops and buy a doll for the little girl. He did so, and when he returned with the doll, Aiko placed it by the fireplace. She said, as long as the doll stays in the room, her spirit will no longer remain. Visitors from all over the world who have heard the story have been bringing down toys and dolls, sweets and chocolates to leave for Wee Annie. It got to a point where the toys were getting too much, and that the museum needed to ask people to stop leaving the toys for the ghost. While Mary King's Close is an atmospheric place, it's not the only hidden gem that sits below the streets of Edinburgh. On the opposite side of the Royal Mile, one would find Southbridge, a monumental but flawed 18th century bridge constructed of 19 separate arches. The bridge was built to link the Old Town with the university building in the south side of the city. The construction was completed in 1788 and was deemed appropriate to allow someone of standing to cross the bridge first, and this responsibility fell to a well-known judge's wife. However, mere days before she was due to cross, she died. But a promise was a promise, and the first body to cross that was of the deceased woman. Locals were shocked and claimed that the bridge was cursed and refused to cross it. But that didn't last long. Businesses began to build on the bridge to take advantage of the passing trade, and they would build their basements into the arches, creating dark, damp, airless vaults. The arches were used by the businesses such as tanners and butchers. Tavern owners would store barrels of beer within the stone arches. However, construction of the bridge was done on a very tight budget, which resulted in the bridge not being sealed properly. The weather in Scotland has always been unreliable, but heavy rain meant the arches flooded and got damaged by water that would seep through the stonework, damaging the business's goods. Very quickly they moved out, leaving the arches empty to allow the poor and the desolate to move in, calling it their home. These included immigrants, Highlanders who were affected by the Highland clearances, and even body snatchers. The darkness of the damp vaults are full of ghostly tales that have plagued the underground tunnels for many years. Tales of a large shadowy figure called Mr. Boots has been known to stalk visitors, follow them around, and even bellow, "Get out!" It's thought that he killed a woman and stashed her body in his house, and when visitors come to the vault and stand in the place where he stored the body, he gets very angry. He is thought to also go by the name The Watcher, who was an 18th century slum landlord who is said to be seen to wear a red coat. Heavy footsteps are heard before he is seen. A poltergeist is said to haunt the vaults, attacking people, throwing stones at visitors, but many believe there's trying to scare people off as he doesn't want people in his vaults. Coming up on Eerie Earth, I will be joined by Annabelle, who works for Auld Reekie Tours in Edinburgh. They conduct guided ghost tours around Edinburgh, even taking visitors down to the depths of the dark vaults to tell them the stories of the past residents and the ones who are still there. She will be telling us of her experience from within the infamous Southbridge vaults. And welcome back to Eerie Earth. I'm now joined with Annabelle, who is a tour guide for Auld Reekie Tours, who takes guests and visitors alike down to the infamous Southbridge vaults. Thank you, Anna, for joining us on Eerie Earth tonight. Could we just start by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and what you do with Auld Reekie Tours?
I'm a guide for Auld Reekie Tours. I've been with them for about a year now, and we take people on tours down at the Niddry Street Vaults. We also take people to Greyfriars Graveyard, and we take people around the streets of the Old Town of Edinburgh.
And do you head into the Southbridge vaults as well, or is that?
Yes, we go into the Southbridge vaults, the Niddry Street side. We have a section of vaults down there that are privately owned, and the vaults include a genuine witch's coven down there that was owned by a gentleman called George Cameron, aka the Hermit. So he owned that witch's coven. So he practiced down there with his witches, and it's still intact. It looks like they've not used it for several years now. After the high priest George Cameron died. But it's as it was. It's still intact, and it's set for ritual, and it just looks like they walked away from it yesterday. It's a bit like a time capsule. It's really impressive.
They get a lot of activity down with the witches. Might have conjured quite a lot of energy. Do they get a lot of activity in there?
Yeah, down the vaults, there is an awful lot of paranormal activity. It's regarded one of the most haunted places in the UK. We have several regular spirits down there that are frequently sighted. What's interesting from a guide's perspective is we go down there frequently every night, and we go down with different people. And without us prompting it, people see similar things and similar activity and occurrences down there. There was actually quite a major incident regarding the Witch's Coven. They started off renting a vault that was further up the subterranean street than the one that they later hired. And the owner of the coven, George Cameron, decided to spend the night in that coven down the vault alone one night. Wow. To try and understand. Very, very brave. You wouldn't catch me doing that. He decided to spend the night down there alone to try and figure out what was happening in regards to this unexplained reoccurring paranormal activity. Now, what was happening was people were going into that chamber, into that vault, and experiencing poltergeist-like activity. They could feel themselves being pushed. They could feel like restrictions around their neck. They could feel a very sort of malevolent presence in the room. Pools of stagnant water would just appear for no explicable reason. And they would leave the vaults, lock up because there was a gate across the front of the chamber, leave the vaults, come back in the next day, and things had been thrown around the room and knocked off shelves. And nobody should have been in there. Nothing should have been causing that activity. So that's when George decided that he was going to spend the night to try and work out what was going on while they weren't there. He set up his little camp, then was subject to a poltergeist attack. He could feel himself being pushed and shoved. It absolutely terrified the life out of the man. He shot out of there. The next day, he told the owner of the vaults what had happened, and just basically said, don't let anybody else back inside that particular chamber, because whatever it is that goes on down those vaults seems to manifest itself in that particular chamber. And we do now still take our visitors into that particular chamber, but we tell people not to stand inside the stone circle, but to stand on the outside of the stone circle, because George, he went in there one last time to pack up all his stuff. He stood in the middle of the circle and he reversed the cycle. So any negative energy would be trapped inside the stone circle. And there's a pattern. If anybody gets inside the stone circle, things tend to happen to them. During tours, that particular room, if anything is going to happen to anyone, it tends to be in that particular chamber. So if anybody's going to react, if anyone's going to start feeling sick or feeling faint or feeling emotional or feeling some kind of paranormal occurrence, it tends to be in that particular room.
And you find you get a lot of activity with the visitors quite often, or is it?
We do. We hear footsteps quite frequently. And we hear very loud bangs down there that we haven't actually got an explanation for. There's lots of thumping and rattling down there. And a lot of people report sightings of, there's one particular spirit called the Watcher down there. And we believe that he was a slum landlord for the vaults, because the vaults used to be a notorious slum back in the 1800s, and he was a slum landlord, and he still thinks that he owns the place, basically, that he is watching out down the vaults. He doesn't like intruders, and he has a habit of trying to frighten people out of the vaults. You will hear a very loud get out. A lot of people have seen a very tall gentleman in a long black cloak, long hair. He's got very sort of vile whiskey breath, and he rattles keys. One thing that everybody has in common who has sighted the Watcher is that nobody's been able to describe his face for varying reasons. Either his face is totally blacked out, or he has his back to people. or he seems to be wearing some kind of mask. He's basically, his face is hidden, so it's almost as if he doesn't want to be identified. So very, very frequently people have cited that and heard. He gets nicknamed Mr. Boots as well, because often his manifestation is very loud footsteps.
Have you ever seen him yourself?
I had one occurrence where I said goodbye to everybody at the end of a tour. It was the last tour of the night, and us tour guides have the very unenviable task of having to go in at the end of the last tour into the vaults and blow out all the candles. Right. So it's very nerve-wracking. So we have to go the length and breadth of the vaults and blow out these candles. So I went up the top end of the corridor, blew out all the candles, started walking back down, looked down the bottom end of the vaults, and it seemed to be, the light was sort of strange. It wasn't as it was 10 minutes ago. And I could have sworn there was a couple of candles still lit down there. And I could look down, it looked like it was illuminated, but I couldn't see the candles lit. The next thing, something very hastily moved towards me, and I could then see the candles again. I shot out the vault, went down, got the person that works in the office, came back up, told him what had happened, looked down the corridor, nobody around, nobody down the vaults, and you could still see that two candles were lit. Something happens, it really does shake you up for a while, and you really don't want to go back down there. And you go back in to blow the candles out in twos after that for a while.
I guess when you're with visitors, you have to kind of create this persona of where you're this brave explorer of the vault. So if something happens, you've got to refrain from screaming and running out of there.
Absolutely. But quite often the guides can get more of a fright than the visitors can get, because if they hear footsteps or they hear like an eerie sound coming from up the corridor or something like that, they potentially think that's some kind of jumper outer, or they potentially think that it's some kind of sound effect that we've created or something like that. But as guides, we know what should and shouldn't be happening. And quite often people have heard something up the other end of the vaults and they're like, who's up there? And I'm like, well, nobody's up there. We're entirely alone. And they don't believe me. They think there's somebody up there making the shuffling sounds. So I will take them up there, and you just see the colour drain from their faces when they realise there's no other way out, and there's nobody else in the vaults that could possibly be making that noise. As soon as you walk into the vaults, there's just a thick atmosphere. There's a very oppressive feeling to the vaults. It's so atmospheric.
You get thousands of visitors to the vaults every year. What do you think makes the vaults so appealing? Do you think it's the hauntings, the histories, or the fact that it's somewhere that you can't get to every single day?
I think it's probably a combination of all those things. I mean, we have so many unique things about those vaults. I mean, it's just very strange. Edinburgh has quite a notorious underground and underworld. So I think it's just a very, very curious place and really quite unique, and the activity and things that went on in these places.
So when does the vaults reopen officially then?
So the vaults reopen officially on the 4th of September. So we're doing a couple of little private tours at the moment, but we will be fully fledged as from the 4th of September.
Fantastic. And obviously when you do go reopen, where can people find information, and where can they book tickets and things like that if they wanted to head down?
Well, we're all over social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and TripAdvisor. And they can also visit our website at www.auldreekietours.com, and they can book through our website.
Fantastic. Well, Anna, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been really great hearing all the stories. And
thanks for having me.
I hope you stay safe, and I hope the tour goes very well tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You take care.
Thanks. Bye.
And that was Annabelle of Auld Reekie Tours. If you ever find yourself in Edinburgh and you're at a loss as what to do, I would highly recommend that you go to visit one of the vaults and go on a tours with Auld Reekie Tours. You can book a tour at www.auldreekietours.com. That's www.auldreekietours.com. Or if you find yourself in Edinburgh, you can just head to the office where you can book a tour there. They have a very good talent of making you feel comfortable while making you feel scared at the same time. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can do by following us on Facebook at facebook.com/Eerie Earth, or you can follow us on Twitter at Earth_Eerie, or you can follow us on Instagram at Eerie Earth Official. If you want to get in contact with the show, you can do by emailing me at eerieearth@hotmail.com. Thanks very much for listening, guys. Bye-bye for now.